I remember the exact sound of the door when she left. Not the words, not the last look, just that soft, final click like the end of a sentence we never finished. A year before that, it was different. Same door, same apartment. But she used to lean back against it, laughing, the kind of laugh that made the walls feel whiter, the ceilings higher. Back then, the city outside was just background noise, a distant hum beneath our plans. We had a life mapped out on scraps of paper and phone notes, names for children, streets where we wanted to live when we finally got a house. Trips we'd take when things calmed down. It was always when, never if. I didn't see the distance at first. It slipped in quietly, the way the gray light creeps under the curtains on a rainy morning. Not dramatic, just there. It started with dinners. We used to eat at the small table by the window, two mismatched chairs, an old wooden surface that tilted slightly if you leaned too hard. We joked about it, how everything we owned looked like it had a story. Then one night she took her plate to the couch, just this once. I'm exhausted. I stayed at the table, my fork scraping against the plate, listening to the muffled TV, the glow of it reflecting faintly on the glass. "Come sit," she said without looking back. "After I finish," I answered. It sounded harmless, so small. One night turned into three turned into a week. The empty chair in front of me stopped looking temporary. It started looking permanent. Conversations shortened. We traded details instead of feelings. "How was your day?" "Busy." "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just tired." Tired became the shield she hid behind. I believed her, or maybe I wanted to. The first time I noticed her phone always face down, I told myself it was nothing. People changed, habits shifted. We were adults, not teenagers suspicious over every notification. Still, there was a new tension in the air, a subtle static between us and the devices on the table. She started working late more often. Campaign deadlines. Client calls. Traffic was insane. I watched the weather app more than I should have. When it was raining and she was late, I paced the apartment, listening to the drumming on the windows, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt below. Sometimes I imagined her stuck on a train, headphones in, staring at a fogged-up window, thinking about us. Sometimes I imagined her thinking about anything but us. One Thursday, I made dinner properly. Pasta, garlic bread, a cheap bottle of red wine we used to drink before we started saving. Candles even. I wanted to reset us just for one night. She walked in close to 9. Her hair was damp from the rain, mascara slightly smudged beneath her eyes, the kind of look that used to make me step forward and brush her cheek with my thumb. This time I just took her bag and hung it by the door. "You cooked," she said, her voice flat with surprise that sounded more like guilt than gratitude. "Yeah," I answered. "Thought we could, sit down." "Like we used to." Her eyes flicked to the table, then to the clock on the microwave. "I'm not really hungry," she murmured. "We grabbed something at the office." I tried not to choke on the word. "Okay, you can just sit with me then." "I'll eat." She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "I just need to answer this first," she said, already halfway to the bedroom. The bedroom door didn't close all the way. It stopped just short of the frame, leaving a thin strip of light. I heard her voice, low and soft, not office formal but familiar intimate, the kind of tone she used to save for late-night talks with me. I sat at the table, fork suspended over the plate, listening to the rain and the murmur of her words. The food steamed in front of me, untouched. The candles burned down, wax collecting in uneven white puddles. That night, after she fell asleep with her back to me, I lay awake staring at the faint city glow tracing the outline of the curtains. I told myself I was being paranoid. You trust the person you plan a life with. That's the rule. You don't interrogate every silence. But the silences kept multiplying. Texts she replied to later. Calls she took in the hallway. Weekend plans that dissolved into, "I really need to catch up on stuff." Then came the empty dinners, a string of them. She'd text at 7, "Don't wait up, might be late." I'd still put out 2 plates, still set 2 glasses, still turn my head at every car door slam from the street. Every time, the clock hands crawled toward midnight, and the food cooled untouched in the kitchen. One rainy Tuesday, I broke. The apartment felt too quiet, too hollow, every ticking second scraping against my nerves. Her laptop sat half-closed on the coffee table, screen asleep, a faint light pulsing like a heartbeat. I knew her password. Everyone in a long-term relationship does, even if they pretend they don't. I told myself I was just going to check her calendar, maybe see if she'd added something I'd forgotten. Maybe prove to myself that I was wrong. The screen lit up. The familiar wallpaper, a photo of us from the first year, her head on my shoulder, sun in her hair, flashed across before the icons loaded. My chest tightened. There we were, smiling at a younger version of us that had no idea what was coming. Her messages were neatly categorized. work, family, friends. I hesitated over each, fingers shaking slightly. I almost stopped. Almost. Then I saw the thread pinned at the top, just a first name, a simple, ordinary name, no last initial, no emoji. Pinned, the last message preview read, "I'm home, he's here." My breath caught, my thumb opened the thread. A wall of blue and gray bubbles filled the screen. Late-night timestamps, inside jokes I didn't recognize, photos of coffee cups, office elevators, rain on glass, her words written in a tone I hadn't heard from her in months, playful, alive, unguarded. I scrolled, "You make the days bearable." I wish I could tell him the truth, but I don't know how. When I'm with you, I feel seen. The room felt smaller with every line. The humming fridge, the distant traffic, the rain, everything pressed in. Finally, I reached the message that broke the timeline of our life clean in half. "Sometimes I imagine just walking out and starting over with you." My vision blurred. My thumb hovered above the next reply from him, a reply I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Then I heard her key in the door. The door opened, soft footsteps, the rustle of her coat. "Hey," she called, casual, like nothing had shifted in the universe. "You still up?" I closed the laptop slowly, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the rain. "Yeah," I said, staring at the closed screen reflecting a warped version of my face. "Yeah, I'm up." The laptop was still warm under my hands when she walked into the room, shaking droplets of rain from her hair, eyes landing on the candles I hadn't blown out and the untouched plate on the table. And in that small, suspended second, between her noticing the table, noticing my face, and noticing where the laptop sat, the life we had planned together hung in the air like a breath neither of us could release. She saw it instantly. Not the laptop, not the candles. Me, her smile, the automatic, tired, home again curve of her mouth faded before it fully formed. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, scanning the scene the way you'd scan a crime scene photo. Candles, cold food, laptop slightly off-center, my hands still too close to it. "You're still awake," she said. Something in her voice told me she already knew. Before any words, before any accusation, she knew. "Yeah." The word came out rough, unfamiliar in my own throat. "We need to talk." That line, the cliché one, I'd always imagined I'd say it differently if it ever came to this. Something more composed, smarter. But in the moment there was only that. Her gaze dropped to the laptop. Silence filled the room, thick, almost physical. The hum of the fridge, the distant rise and fall of a siren somewhere in the city, the soft patter of rain on the window, everything felt amplified. She didn't ask what I'd seen, didn't ask why I'd looked. She just walked past me, sat on the edge of the couch and exhaled, her shoulders sinking. "How much?" she whispered. It was such a small question for such a big fracture. "Enough," I answered. "Enough to know it's not just work keeping you late." Her hands folded in her lap, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I almost laughed at that, but the sound died halfway up my chest. "This far," I repeated. "How far is this far, exactly?" She swallowed, eyes fixed on the coffee table. "We haven't slept together, if that's what you're asking." There was a ridiculous, fleeting moment of relief. As if the absence of one physical act could undo all the words I'd just read, then the anger rolled in, slow but heavy. "So what is it then?" I asked quietly. "What do I call it?" Because it looks a lot like planning a different life with someone who isn't me. Her eyes flickered just once up to meet mine, and in that one look I saw it guilt, fear, and something else, something like grief. He's just someone I talk to," she said, but the sentence wilted under its own weight. "Someone you talk to about me," I replied. "Someone you tell the truth to." "The truth you don't tell me." We were both speaking softly, but every word felt like it was echoing in a cathedral. "I tried," she said. "When?" Her jaw clenched. "All those nights I said something was wrong, and you said we were just stressed. All those times I said I felt alone, and you told me we'd fix it when things calmed down. Things never calmed down. You were always somewhere else." The words hit because there was truth in them, and the worst kind of truth, the kind entwined with betrayal. "I was trying to build the life we talked about," I said, "so we could have all those things we wrote down, the trips, the house, the kids." "I know," she whispered, and somewhere along the line, I stopped believing we'd get there. Silence again. She wiped at her cheek, surprised to find tears there. "I didn't go looking for him," she said. "It just happened. We started talking at work then after, and it was easy. He listened. He saw me. Not just the version of me fitting into some 5-year plan pinned to the fridge. I thought of the notes, the lists, the shared documents with budgets and timelines, things that once felt like intimacy, like teamwork. Had they become bars instead? "What's his name?" I asked. The question surprised both of us. She hesitated. "Ethan." The name sat between us, shapeless and heavy, a person I'd never met, but who somehow knew more about my wife's inner life than I did. Do you love him? I asked. I didn't know if I wanted the truth, but the question came anyway. She closed her eyes. After a long moment, she shook her head, a small, defeated motion. I don't know, she whispered. I just know I feel less invisible with him. The word invisible cut deeper than love would have. Invisible, in my own marriage. In the life I'd been so busy building, I hadn't noticed the foundation rotting. I slept on the couch that night. Not because we fought, not in any shouting, throwing things kind of way, but because neither of us knew how to occupy the same bed with that much truth between us. She stayed in the bedroom, the door half open, light off. I lay in the dark living room listening to the rain taper off, turning into a faint dripping from the balcony railing. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did, her laughing as she tried to paint the bedroom and smeared a blue streak down my arm. Her forehead pressed to mine in crowded trains, her voice saying, "It's you, it's always you." The night we decided to move in together, I kept waiting for anger to flare wild and consuming, but it didn't. What I felt was hollow. Like someone had come in and quietly taken the furniture from my heart while I was busy answering emails. The days that followed blurred together. We moved around each other like roommates in a shared space, careful not to collide. She made coffee without asking how I took mine. I worked later than I needed to, sitting in my office long after my tasks were done, staring at spreadsheets that didn't matter. At night, the apartment felt like a museum of our old life. 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom, her robe hanging on the back of the door, the framed photo of us at the beach, leaning into each other, eyes squinted against the sun. Artifacts of a story that no longer matched the people in it. Her phone buzzed less often. I noticed. I hated that I noticed. Once, when it lit up on the counter, she didn't reach for it immediately. The name Ethan flashed, then disappeared. She watched it fade with an expression I couldn't read, pain, longing, guilt, all braided tightly together. "Are you still talking to him?" I asked one evening, my voice too calm. She stared at the darkened phone. "I told him we needed to stop," she said, "that I needed to figure out my marriage. And he said he'd wait, or he'd walk away if that's what I chose. He just wanted me to be happy." The cruel thing was, I believed her. I believed that he was, in his own way, trying to do the right thing inside a very wrong thing. It didn't make it better. It just made it more human. Some nights I lay awake imagining him. Not his face that stayed blurry, but his presence. I pictured him sitting across from her at a cafe, listening with the kind of focus I'd reserved for client calls and deadlines. I pictured him making her laugh on days she'd come home too quiet for me to notice she'd been crying at lunch. I hated him, but under the hate, there was something closer to fear. Fear that he was simply better at loving the version of her she'd become. One particularly sleepless night, I got up and walked through the apartment in the gray pre-dawn light. The city outside was muted, the usual noise dialed down to a murmur. I stood by the window, hand resting on the cold glass, watching a single figure cross the street below, umbrella tilted against a wind I couldn't feel. Behind me, the couch where I'd spent the last week looked sunken, the cushions slouching as if tired of holding my weight. The bedroom door was closed. A thin line of warm light traced the edge. She'd left the lamp on again, saying the dark made her feel too alone, a choice loaded with irony in a two-person apartment. I realized then that I was living with two ghosts, the ghost of the woman I married, and the ghost of the man I'd never meet but couldn't stop imagining. In the weeks that followed, we tried half-hearted measures. One awkward counseling session where we both spoke in rehearsed phrases. A couple of forced date nights where the food tasted like cardboard and the conversations circled safely around work and movies. We never touched the core, the quiet way we'd both abandoned each other long before Ethan entered the picture. Eventually, she packed a small suitcase. No drama, no screaming, just the soft zip of a bag being closed. "I think I need time," she said, standing in the doorway with her fingers clenched around the handle, "to figure out what I want. Who I am without all of this noise." "Is he where you're going?" I asked. The question came out more gently than I expected. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "No," she whispered. "At least, that's not the plan." The word plan stung. Plans were our thing, our whiteboard, our notes. Now they belonged to something else. She stepped past me, the familiar scent of her shampoo trailing behind. For a moment her hand brushed my arm, a touch that felt like muscle memory. Then it was gone, the door closed. That same soft click. This time there were no candles, no open laptops, no half-eaten dinners, just me and the echo of a life deflating. Weeks turned into months. Her mail still came to the apartment for a while, small envelopes with her name on them stacking by the door. I started sleeping in the bed again, on my side, leaving her side untouched, the indentation of her body slowly fading from the mattress. I didn't ask our mutual friends too many questions. When they slipped and mentioned seeing her with someone or looking different, I let the details slide past. Every fragment lodged like glass under the skin, but I didn't dig them out. The city cycled through seasons. Rain, heat, leaves curling brown on the sidewalks. I went to work. I came home. I existed. Then one morning, almost a year to the day since she walked out with that small suitcase, the intercom buzzed while I was making coffee. The sound startled me. No one visited unannounced anymore. I pressed the button. Hello. A familiar voice, thinner somehow, replied, "It's me." I froze, hand hovering over the counter, the smell of fresh coffee weaving with the sudden thud of my heartbeat. I'm downstairs," she said. "Can I come up?" I looked around at the apartment, the slightly neater living room, the solitary mug on the table, the bare space where our shared photos had once been. Everything felt smaller and brighter in the morning light. "Yeah," I said, after a long, suspended breath. "Yeah, come up." A minute later, the elevator doors would open, and she would step into the hallway holding something in her arms, something that would make the past year, the messages, the affair, the leaving, all rearrange themselves into a new, devastating shape. I heard her before I saw her. Soft footsteps in the hallway, a faint, unfamiliar sound layered over them, a tiny, restless rustle, like fabric brushing against something fragile. When the knock came, it was gentle, 2 taps, almost apologetic. My hand lingered on the doorknob for a second longer than necessary, 1 breath in, 1 breath out. Then I opened the door. There she was, not the woman who left, someone adjacent to her. Her hair was shorter, curling just above her shoulders, the ends uneven like she'd cut it herself on a restless night. There were shadows under her eyes, but they weren't the fresh smudges of missed sleep. They were deeper, settled in. Her body seemed smaller somehow, as if she'd shed not just weight, but an entire layer of who she used to be. And in her arms, wrapped in a gray blanket, was a baby. The world narrowed. The hum of the building, the distant traffic, the drip of the tap in my kitchen, everything dimmed to a low murmur. All I could hear clearly was the shallow, irregular rhythm of the baby's breaths and my own heart pounding in my ears. She started, then corrected herself, voice unsteady. "This is Noah." The name landed like a stone in a still pond. Rings of meaning rippled outward. Noah, a name we had once circled on a list, a maybe name, a future name. Now attached to a very real, very small human blinking up at my doorway with dark, unfocused eyes. My throat tightened. "How old is he?" I managed. 3 months, she said. Almost. The math hit me before I wanted it to. 3 months plus 9, a year. She must have read something in my face because she shifted her weight nervously, bouncing the baby slightly. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly. "And you're right about the timing." The hallway felt too public for this conversation. I stepped back. "Come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold, the baby's head nestled against her chest. He made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a protest at the change in temperature or light. She adjusted him with practiced hands, the movement automatic. The apartment smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. Ordinary smells. The sight in front of me was anything but ordinary. She looked around, eyes catching on empty spaces where photos used to hang, on the unshared bed visible through the partially open door. "You changed some things," she said quietly. "Yeah." My voice sounded far away. "So did you." She winced, then nodded. "Can we sit?" We ended up at the same small table by the window where the distance between us first started to show. I sat in my old chair. She took the one opposite, sliding into it carefully with Noah still in her arms. He squirmed, making soft, unfinished sounds. His tiny hand escaped the blanket and flailed for a moment before finding the edge of her shirt. The simplicity of that gesture, the way he rooted for her without thinking, twisted something deep inside me. "I didn't come here to blow up your life again," she began. "That's reassuring," I said, the bitterness slipping out before I could catch it. She flinched, then nodded, accepting the hit. "I deserve that." We sat in a fragile quiet. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, casting the table in a muted, colorless glow. Outside, a bus rumbled past. "How long were you going to wait?" I asked finally, nodding toward the baby, "before telling me you had a child?" Her grip tightened slightly around Noah. "I wasn't sure I should tell you at all," she admitted. "Then I realized I couldn't keep pretending you didn't exist in this story, even if your role isn't what we once thought it would be." The word story stung. Ours had always been a shared narrative. Now I was a footnote in a chapter I hadn't written. Is he? I swallowed, the question coiled in my chest like wire. Is he mine? She looked up sharply, eyes wide. "No," she said quickly. "No. He is not." The finality in her tone left no room for doubt. Strangely, the pain of that truth was layered, a deep cut of betrayal, and beneath it, a second, quieter ache. He wasn't mine. But in some ghost version of our life, he could have been. Ethan, I asked. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the baby again. Yeah. The name that had once existed only in glowing message bubbles now had a face attached, not his face, but the face of his child. Their child, the child of the affair that ended my marriage. I didn't come here to ask for anything, she said, voice trembling. Not money, not help. I just couldn't keep walking around this city knowing you were out there, thinking our story ended with me just disappearing. It didn't, it turned into this. She brushed a finger over Noah's cheek. He blinked, a tiny frown forming and dissolving as quickly as it appeared. What happened? The question hung between us, gentle but insistent. What happened after you left? Her shoulders slumped. For a moment, she looked more like the woman I recognized, the one who used to fall asleep on this very couch with her legs tangled in a blanket and her head in my lap. I moved into a small place near the river, she said. At first, it felt intoxicating. Freedom, no expectations, just me, some second-hand furniture, and a new routine. I pictured it, a bare apartment. Rain on a different set of windows, her sitting on a mattress on the floor, eating cheap takeout and calling it liberation. I kept talking to him, she continued, to Ethan, without the guilt of coming home to you. It felt simpler in a messed-up way. We weren't hiding as much. We went out in public. We held hands in daylight instead of in text bubbles. There was no triumph in her voice, only a weary honesty. And then I missed a period, she said quietly, then another. The room felt colder suddenly. I took the test alone, she went on, in that tiny bathroom. The tiles were freezing under my feet. When it turned positive, I just sat on the floor and laughed. It wasn't happy laughter. It was disbelief. I'd blown up one life and now another was forcing its way in. Did you tell him? I asked. Of course, she said. He was shocked. Scared, but he said he'd be there, that we'd figure it out, that this could be a new start. Her smile was brittle, a new start built on the ruins of an old one. What about us? I asked. Did you ever think about calling? About telling me before now? She nodded, eyes glassy. Every time I walked past a stroller, she said. Every appointment where they asked about family history and I had to say your name in my head and then erase it. I kept telling myself it would hurt you more to know, that maybe it was kinder to let you move on without this. And what changed? She adjusted Noah's blanket again. He was born, she said simply. And when I held him, all the lies and half-truths and justifications I'd been living with, they didn't fit anymore. I looked at this tiny person and thought, he deserves a story that isn't built on pretending entire people don't exist. We sat with that. Noah shifted, making a small, almost questioning sound. His eyes, still that newborn cloudy color, drifted in my direction. For a moment, he looked right through me, as if I were just another shape in a room he'd barely begun to understand. Why come now? I asked. After 3 months. I wanted to come sooner, she said, but I was ashamed of what I'd done, of what I was asking you to see. I kept thinking, who am I to show up at his door like this? You're the mother of a child we once planned together, I said quietly. Even if this isn't the child we planned. Her face crumpled for a second, then steadied. I'm not here to pretend this is some miracle that makes everything okay, she said. I know what I did. I know what I destroyed. I just couldn't keep him a secret from the man I once wanted to build a family with, even if all you ever do with this knowledge is carry it quietly. There were 100 questions swirling in my chest about practical things, about Ethan, about whether they were still together, whether this baby was growing up in a home built on a foundation stronger than ours had been at the end. But what rose first was something simpler. Can I? I hesitated, then nodded toward Noah. Can I hold him? She blinked, clearly not expecting that. Are you sure? No, absolutely not, but I nodded anyway. She stood and stepped around the table, moving slowly, carefully transferring the small, warm weight into my arms. His head was lighter than I expected, his body both fragile and strangely solid. He smelled like milk and faint baby soap, a clean, universal scent. His fingers uncurled, brushing clumsily against my chest. For a second, everything else fell away, the past year, the betrayal, the arguments that never fully ignited. All that existed was this child, breathing in short, imperfect patterns, completely unaware of the mess that had assembled to bring him here. Tears blurred my vision. One slipped free, landing on his blanket. He squirmed, then settled again, tucking his face against me as if I were just another warm surface in a cold world. I'm sorry, she whispered behind me. Her voice sounded like it was coming from far down a tunnel. For all of it. For how it happened, for who I became. I didn't answer, couldn't, not with my throat this tight. All I could think was, this could have been our son. A different version of this moment could have existed, me and her in this same room, exhausted but together, laughing at the way his hair stuck up or his face scrunched when he cried. Instead, I was holding the living proof of the life she built with someone else. And yet, he was still just a baby, an innocent, breathing boundary between my past and whatever my future might be. After a long, fragile stretch of silence, I handed Noah back. My arms felt strangely light and heavy at the same time. "I'm not your enemy," she said softly, cradling him close. "I know it might be easier if I were. If you could just hate me and move on. But I'm just a person who made horrible choices out of loneliness and fear." "I know," I said, and I did. That was the worst part. We ended up back at the doorway, the same threshold where she'd once kissed me goodbye on rushed mornings, coffee on her breath, keys in her hand. Now she stood there with a baby on her hip, unsure if she was entering or leaving. "What do you want from me?" I asked, not accusing, just tired. She shook her head. "Nothing," she said. "Not really. Maybe forgiveness one day, not now. I don't deserve it now. I just needed you to see the whole picture. To know that that life we planned, it exists in a very twisted way, just not the way either of us imagined." I looked at Noah one last time. He yawned, his tiny mouth opening wide, eyes squeezing shut. For a moment his face looked eerily like hers, then the resemblance dissolved back into general baby-ness. "Take care of him," I said. "I will," she replied, "and take care of yourself." "Please." She stepped into the hallway, then paused, turning back. "There's one more thing," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, he's not here anymore, not like that." The words hung in the air, hovering like a storm cloud that hadn't decided where to break. "What do you mean, not like that?" I asked slowly, my hand still resting on the door, the distance between us suddenly feeling fragile again, not just in what had passed, but in what she was about to say. "He left," she said. Two simple words, but they carried so much quiet wreckage behind them. I tightened my grip on the doorframe. "Left when?" "Before Noah was born," she replied, shifting the baby slightly as he stirred. "We tried for a while to make something whole out of what started broken. But the closer the due date got, the more real everything became. He panicked, said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he couldn't bear the weight of all this. All this, the affair. The wrecked marriage, the new life. So he walked away," I said, my voice flat. She nodded. "He sends money sometimes, through his lawyer. There are documents, agreements, but he's not here." A bitter, dissonant thought flickered through me. The man who took my wife couldn't even stay for the life he helped create. "I don't tell you this so you'll feel sorry for me," she added quickly. "I tell you because I don't want there to be missing pieces. You deserve to know how the story actually went, not the version people soften for dinner parties." I exhaled slowly, looking past her at the hallway, the elevator at the far end, the soft, institutional lighting. Everything looked painfully ordinary. It always did when lives were unraveling. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "Raise him," she said simply, pressing a kiss to Noah's forehead. "Work, sleep when I can, mess up and try again. I don't have a grand plan anymore, just mornings and nights and everything in between." For a moment, an old instinct rose in me, the urge to fix, to step in, to say, "You don't have to do this alone." We had once been a team. I knew her rhythms, her fears, how she took her coffee when she was too tired to remember, but the distance between who we were and who we were now felt too wide to cross with an impulse. "I don't hate you," I heard myself say. She blinked, startled. "You should." "Maybe," I said, "but I don't. I hate what you did. I hate how small it made me feel. I hate that I was building a future in my head while you were building a different one in secret. But you, the person I knew before all this, I can't erase her, and I don't think I want to spend the rest of my life carrying you like a wound." Tears spilled over her lashes. She didn't wipe them away. They traced slow, honest paths down her cheeks. "I don't expect your forgiveness," she whispered. "This isn't forgiveness," I replied. "Not yet, maybe not ever, not in the way people mean it. This is me deciding that the worst thing you did isn't going to be the defining story of my life. I get to write something else." We stood in the doorway, the city morning leaking in around us, muffled car horns, footsteps on wet pavement, someone laughing too loudly down the block. Life outside wasn't pausing to acknowledge this moment. It never does. "Why did you come today?" I asked again, softer now. "Why this morning?" She swallowed. "Because last night," she said, "Noah woke up at 3 in the morning, screaming." Nothing calmed him. I walked the floor with him for hours, my arms shaking, my back burning. I was so exhausted I started seeing things, little flashes of us. You making stupid faces to make him laugh. You arguing with me about sleep schedules. It hurt, but it also reminded me that there was a version of my life where you and I did this together. and I realized I was tired of pretending that version never existed just because I destroyed the bridge to it. Her honesty was a quiet, brutal kind. Not the dramatic confession of someone seeking absolution, but the tired truth of someone who'd finally run out of ways to disguise themselves. I thought, she went on, if there's any chance you could ever find some kind of peace with all of this, it would start with me stopping the lies. So I came. I ran a hand over my face. The stubble rasped against my palm. I hadn't shaved yet. It was still early. Morning light washed everything in pale clarity. Do you want me in his life? I asked, the question surprising even me. She stared at me, eyes wide. I don't know what to want, she admitted. He already has a father biologically, even if that father is choosing distance. You were supposed to be his father in another story. I don't know what role I have the right to ask you to play now. We both looked at Noah. He slept on, peaceful, mouth twitching slightly, caught in some infant dream. I'm not ready to be anything to him, I said honestly. Not yet. I can't step into that kind of space from this kind of pain. It wouldn't be fair to him, or to me. I'd always be measuring him against the ghost of the life I thought I'd have. She nodded, absorbing that. It's okay if the answer is nothing, she said. I just needed the question to exist between us. Not as a fantasy in my head, but as something real you could touch and put down. We fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that used to be comfortable between us, now edged with history. Can I ask you something? She said after a moment. Yeah. Do you ever imagine we could have made it if I'd told you the truth earlier, before him, before the messages got so deep? I thought about all the late nights, the missed conversations, the moments I'd chosen work or numbness over presence. I thought about how long she must have been drifting before she reached for someone else. Sometimes, I said, sometimes I think if we'd both been braver, more honest sooner, we might have found our way back. Other times, I think we were already over, we just didn't want to admit it, and you found someone to give you an exit. She nodded slowly. That's probably the truest version, she said. The word true didn't feel comforting. Truth rarely does, not in its raw form. A car horn blared outside, jolting us both. Noah stirred, then settled. I should go, she said, adjusting him in her arms. He needs feeding soon, and I don't want to overstay whatever this is. Whatever this was, an ending revisited. A door finally opened, not for reunion, but for clarity. Will I see you again? I asked. She looked down at Noah, then back at me. I'll send you updates if you want, she said. Photos, milestones, you don't have to respond. But if knowing he exists somewhere growing up helps you make peace with everything, then maybe that's something I can give back. A very small something, after taking so much. I considered it, the idea of photos arriving on my phone, first steps, first day of school, birthdays, tiny windows into a life adjacent to the one I'd once expected to live. Would that heal me or keep the wound open? I didn't know. Maybe, I said, not now, not yet, but maybe someday. For now, I just need quiet. She nodded, I understand. We stood there for one last, suspended moment. No grand speeches, no promises, just two people on opposite sides of a threshold holding the weight of their choices. I did love you, she said suddenly. Her voice broke on the past tense. I need you to know that. What I did doesn't erase it. It just proves how badly I handled my own fear. I loved you too, I replied, and that doesn't disappear just because we couldn't carry it safely. A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. Goodbye, she whispered. Goodbye, I answered. She turned and walked down the hallway, her steps steady but slow. The elevator doors slid open, then closed behind her with a soft metallic sigh. I closed the apartment door. This time the click didn't feel like collapse. It felt like finality. The morning was quiet. Light pooled on the floor in pale rectangles. I walked to the window and watched the street below, people hurrying with umbrellas, a dog tugging its owner toward a tree, a cyclist weaving through traffic. The ordinary choreography of other people's lives. On the table, two faint ring marks from old coffee cups sat side by side, evidence of a time when this space held two people planning a future. I traced them lightly with my fingertip, then let my hand fall. In the kitchen, the coffee had gone lukewarm. I poured it down the sink and made a fresh pot, the smell filling the apartment with something warm and grounding. I stood there listening to the soft drip of the machine, the distant hum of the city, my own breathing slowly evening out. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't going to arrive like a single cinematic moment. It was going to be a series of small mornings like this, choosing not to replay her messages in my head, choosing not to measure my worth against a man who couldn't stay, choosing to let the idea of the life we planned loosen its grip on my throat. I stepped onto the small balcony, the cold air waking my skin. The sky was still gray, but there was a thin brightness at the edges of the clouds, a suggestion of sun waiting its turn. I closed my eyes and breathed in, the smell of wet concrete and distant exhaust mixing with the faint trace of coffee. Somewhere across the city, she was probably sitting in a dim room, cradling Noah, humming something soft to him. Somewhere, Ethan was waking up to a morning unburdened by a crying child, carrying his own kind of emptiness. Here, in this small apartment, it was just me, not half of a broken couple. Not the almost father of a child who wasn't mine, just me. The chair at the table was still empty across from mine, but it no longer felt like a question mark. It felt like space, space I could fill or leave open. Space that didn't need to be rushed. The life we planned together existed now as a quiet ache, not a directive. A chapter that closed, not with revenge or reunion, but with a morning where I learned how to stand in my own company again. I opened my eyes, the light had shifted just slightly. The city kept moving, and for the first time in a long time, I let it move without feeling like I'd fallen behind. I turned back into the apartment, the door to the future not flung open, not locked shut, just waiting for me to walk through when I was ready. The apartment, the door to the future not flung open, not locked shut, just waiting for me to walk through when I was ready.